Anthony Rubano is a Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer at the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office in the Department of Natural Resources. He works with historic properties under a variety of state and national programs and has consulted across the country on historic preservation and downtown design issues. He has overseen Illinois' state and federal cultural resource protection programs and provided architectural services to over 60 historic Illinois Main Street communities. Anthony has taught architectural history at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Anthony earned a Master of Architecture degree with an emphasis on architectural history and preservation from the University of Illinois. And with that, please enjoy the presentation.
So the barbecue in one form or other has enjoyed an almost constant presence in American history, but its iteration in the 20th century, suburb, has had the most impact on our popular culture. The barbecue has remained current and vital while other 20th century fads were discarded. Associations that the barbecue fostered, such as home and hearth, informality, sociability, and familial bonding, offered suburbanites what their newly minted lifestyles potentially lacked. Now, grilling is not new. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that indicates the existence of fire pits employed to cook meat as far back as 25,000 BCE. Perhaps the most vivid, though historically dubious account of the discovery of barbecuing comes to us from English essayist Charles Lamb in his A Dissertation upon Roast Pig of 1822. He writes that Bobo, the, quote, lubberly son of an ancient Chinese swineherd, accidentally set his father's cottage ablaze, killing and unexpectedly roasting the pigs inside. While trying to revive a pig killed in the fire, Bobo burned his fingers, then stuck them in his mouth to cool them. "Oh, father, the pig, he shouted. "Do come and taste how nice the burnt pig eats." And thus barbecuing was born. Perhaps in a more truthful piece of history, in pre-Columbian North America, barbecuing stretched from the Gulf Coast to Puget Sound. As early as the 1580s, English colonists wrote of Native Americans cooking over glowing embers, as depicted in this engraving. An integral part of Mexican culture, cooking outdoors over fire, was brought westward by the Spanish and eventually deposited in California. You can imagine how that happened. Eventually, barbecuing on the East Coast was brought into colonial kitchens. In the 19th century, in many areas of the South and Midwest, large outdoor barbecues became associated with church gatherings and political rallies. Here we see Vice President Breckinridge at a barbecue where, quote, "many thousands assembled," said the New York Times, "to partake of a savory holocaust with appetites previously whetted by vice presidential eloquence," end quote. Such old barbecuing traditions are still strong in the American South and parts of the Midwest. Though in the 20th century, the southern and suburban barbecues existed concurrently, they had very little effect on each other. They differ in nearly every respect, including the cooking process itself. Barbecuing, as any attendee of this early 20th century Labor Day celebration would have known, uses hot wood smoke to slowly cook meat at lower temperatures with no direct flames, whereas grilling quickly sears meat directly over hot coals. Therefore, suburbia grilled rather than barbecued, but for the sake of rhetoric, I'll use the two words interchangeably here to refer to the suburban barbecue. The pop cultural image of the suburban family barbecue, perhaps a wonderful iconic image we see here, may start in the 1950s, but its roots are much older. In the late 19th century, camping grew in popularity as national parks and forests were codified and people enjoyed more free time. A burgeoning middle class with the Industrial Revolution allowing more free time, camping, the enjoyment of nature skyrocketed in popularity. Travel writer and national park champion Horace Kephart, whose two books we see on the right, wrote that food should be as delicious when prepared outdoors as in a kitchen. As the rest of the country was becoming more familiar with eating outdoors through camping, the West Coast continued to enjoy cooking over coals, which it considered authentically Californian. having been brought to the region by the Spaniards centuries before. With its temperate climate, Southern California in particular embraced a lifestyle whose effects would transfer to the act of barbecuing, informality, outdoor entertaining, and sociability, the enjoyment of indoor-outdoor sort of thing. Sunset's first article, I should say the most influential guide to the barbecue and to Western living was Sunset Magazine, a cover of which we see here. And in the late 1920s, Sunset Magazine focused on 4 topics: climate, which essentially is gardening in how they thought of it, food, travel, and home building. And 3 of the 4 of those relate to barbecuing. This is Sunset's first article on barbecues. It appeared in 1931. Its author, Todd Powell, wrote, quote, "The idea of outdoor grills seems to be taking a very firm hold along the Pacific coast, and widely are they spreading. Barbecues are easy to build," talk about that later, "reasonably inexpensive, and a tremendous aid and incentive to outdoor life in general," end quote. As one Sunset author wrote in 1932, quote, "A touch of that charming early California hospitality is suggested in the home barbecue pit. No home on the Western coast should be without one," end quote. Barbecues could be built into the back wall of a house, such as we see here, transforming the patio into a dining terrace, complete with outdoor furniture and potted plants. They could also help define the boundaries of an exterior entertainment zone, whether adjacent to or in view of your revivalist home, meshing barbecuing with local heritage. Architecturalized exterior spaces were sometimes called outdoor rooms with sinks, running water, cabinets. Certainly in the Southern Californian climate, you could have a kitchen outside and not worry so much. Not in Chicago. However, San Francisco landscape architect Horace Cotton recommended locating the barbecue, quote, "as far from as possible from artificial surroundings," end quote. He went on to say, "Along with the fun of eating steaks cooked over an open fire comes that instinctive urge to go native. Who can gnaw upon a perfectly barbecued T-bone, feeling like a prehistoric man cub in nature's wild extant, while gazing upon a foreground of meticulously landscaped garden or a modern bungalow," end quote. Whether sequestered from the house or snuggled against it, the barbecue as portrayed by Sunset was an informal, convivial, and above all, obvious way of eating and entertaining. Advice quickly appeared describing how to successfully engineer a social affair around a barbecue, whether for the next door neighbors or a crowd of 20. National magazines were slow to cover barbecuing. This 1936 Better Homes and Gardens article was among the first in a national magazine to mention them. Although, interestingly, it never actually used the word barbecue. In the same issue, 1936, the author of this article on eating, but not cooking outdoors, said, quote, "I was opposed to the idea." I just love that, the whole idea that she was opposed to the idea. "The place for eating is at the dining table in the house," end quote. After relenting to her daughter's plea to escape the unair-conditioned dining room, the author now gave eating outside her full support. Quote, "Supper out of doors gives you license to try all the tasty one-dish meals you never dared serve inside," end quote, reinforcing the concept that merely being outside somehow loosens the constrictive bands of conformity and propriety, and apparently the prohibitions of casseroles. By May of 1941, Better Homes and Gardens fully converted to barbecuedom when its food editor, Myrna Johnston, who was quite an influential person, wrote that she, quote, "felt that grills she'd seen dotting California patios should be in backyards across America," end quote. In the 1940s, under a new editor, Walter Doty, Sunset Magazine shifted its emphasis towards entertainment and houses in the modern style. This is just an example of that new shift I'm showing on the screen. And you can see snuggled in that exterior terrace is a barbecue. It was at that point that barbecues transitioned from the rustic accompaniment to entertainment centerpiece. In the post-war housing boom, builders eager to cash in on new trends wove the California ranch-style house into the fabric of the nation's landscape, thereby setting up an architecture in which the barbecue could fit perfectly. Media outlets packaged California's suburban, modern, temperate, informal, comfortable outdoor lifestyle for national consumption. And along with this came the barbecue. Severed from its Spanish colonial heritage, the barbecue was associated only with the modernity of the new California lifestyle as the rest of the country understood it. The barbecue became a seasonal object whose meanings diversified as it spread. This 1946 ad for a bank, of all things, asks, what's different about a Californian? The way he eats and the way he banks, end quote. As camping's popularity rebounded after World War II, cookbooks grouped camp cookery and backyard cooking together. Both the Girl Scouts of America and the Boy Scouts of America recommended cooking out of doors, whether in the backyard or at a campground, as a way to reconnect with nature and with family. Now, this outdoor lifestyle was met with some criticism. In his blistering 1959 article, The Case Against the Tailfin Age, prominent modernist architect Edward Durrell Stone, looking very not informal here in this portrait, saw the barbecue and the ranch house as symbols of the, quote, lack of proper direction in our outlook on life in this country. Life in ranch houses is a good excuse for laziness. It is transparently easier to feed the children hamburgers in the backyard like ranch hands than it is to have them seated at a table behaving like potentially cultivated adults, end quote. Well, logically, he was right. It was far more work to cart everything outside into the backyard and then back into the kitchen afterwards. I did that as a kid. My brother's here. You did that too, right? Everybody did that. It was a pain in the butt. But Stone's logic did not persuade most Americans. His image of the family eating outside like ranch hands was aspirational, not cautionary. Buoyed by the countless Westerns on television and at the movies, the newly ensconced suburbanite could forge a new life on the suburban frontier around an open fire in his own backyard, behind his own ranch house. Cowboy-themed barbecue items proliferated: aprons, tablecloths, dishes, mitts, cattle rustling imagery like cattle brands on this mitt. I don't know if you could see it. Helped to reinforce the pervading concept in our culture that meat is the only real food, and that meat as the keystone of a good meal creates an aura of satisfaction. And this meat centrism tended to legitimize grilling, so barbecuing, as the proper and perhaps the only way to prepare meat. Improved refrigeration technology, faster truck transport, the industrialization of agricultural production, the maturation of the modern grocery store, something that we often forget. The grocery store is a modern invention. And increased consumer discretionary spending, all combined to make meat more available and affordable at the very time that barbecuing was ascending. Between 1950 and 1960, the decade that saw the biggest leap in barbecue popularity, per capita beef consumption increased from 63 pounds to 85 pounds. That's per person per year. Annual hot dog sales rose from 75 million to just over 1 billion pounds in a year. This confluence of agricultural and consumer trends enabled the barbecue to become an important element in the social arsenal of American suburbia. In 1956, behavioral analyst William White wrote in The Organization Man, quote, "For newcomers, the teaching of sociability is perhaps the greatest achievement of suburban education," end quote. Barbecues were a perfect, purportedly stress-free way of welcoming new arrivals into the neighborhood. The effort involved in hosting a barbecue was easily rationalized, partly due to the contemporary notion that labor accompanying home ownership was somehow pleasurable, invigorating, therapeutic, restorative. I own a house. Are you kidding me? In 1934, a Sunset article touted huge built-in masonry barbecues as, quote, "something the family patriarch can knock together of a Sunday morning while the rest of the family is recuperating from Saturday night's dissipation at the movies, end quote. This 1948 magazine cover, and it is one of my favorite images from the era. I hope you can see what the hell is going on here. On the upper left corner, we have an overworked businessman sweating and toiling in his office on a Friday afternoon. After a weekend of landscape, furniture refinishing, doghouse construction, home repair, constructing a barbecue, then hosting a barbecue, he returns to work Monday morning at the bottom right, refreshed, miraculously organized, and full of life. I would be dead, quite frankly. Despite the alleged ease of constructing a huge masonry mass in the backyard, portable grills quickly replaced built-ins in popularity beginning in the middle 1950s. In 1954, America spent $18 million on portable barbecues. In 1955, a spokesman for outdoor cooking equipment makers estimated that they would spend 30 million. So 18 million in 54, 30 in 55, which is just over $350 million when adjusted for inflation on portable barbecues alone. The factor that enabled portables to firmly replace built-ins was the rise in the domestic availability of the charcoal briquette. I'm sure something that none of you have ever thought much of. Briquettes alleviated the need for building wood fires. They took far less time to become coals, and they heated more uniformly. The versatile briquette could be used in both built-ins and portable barbecues. Developed in the late 19th century and intended for industrial use, the charcoal briquette owes its popularity to Henry Ford. He did not invent them, but he did do a lot to champion them. He pioneered briquette production around 1910. With his cousin-in-law, Henry Ford bought timberland to supply the wood for his car bodies. So a lot of the Model T is actually made of wood, and he had a lot of waste wood. So he hated waste. He repurposed leftover stumps, scraps, sawdust by burning them into charcoal, mixing them with starch, and then compressing them into evenly sized small pillows. And so he didn't invent it, but he did bring a product that was previously used solely by industry to the public by selling them in his dealerships. So we see an original Ford brochure on the right. This is from about 1930, an ideal feud for foundry use. Eventually, the domestic use overtook the foundry use. He was an avid camping enthusiast, so Ford embraced the briquette as a cooking fuel for his camping trips. In 1951, the Ford Motor Car Company sold its briquette division, and the new company was named after Ford's cousin. Any guess what his name was? E.G. Kingsford. And Kingsford remains a major briquette producer today. From 1956 to 61, the amount of charcoal being briquetted increased 430%. In 1963, a Department of Agriculture report stated, charcoal is continuing to lose its metallurgical and chemical markets, with increased domestic use more than offsetting such losses. The first portable barbecues were flimsy and had no draft capabilities and were soon outmoded by many efficient and stylish models. The Museum of Modern Art gave the portable barbecue its stamp of approval when it included two models in its Useful Objects exhibition of 1946. We could see one on the left and one second to the right next to the chair. Once barbecues were transformed from a homemade project to a commercial product, manufacturers could subject them to the same planned obsolescence that they employed on other consumer goods, like automobiles and household appliances. In 1951, George Stephen, and this is covered in the excellent show across the hall, George Stephen in Palatine, Illinois, took spun metal bowls meant for harbor buoys and invented the Weber grill. Its hood, ventilators, and elevated firebed maintained an even temperature and eliminated flare-ups. He redesigned the grill in 1956 to be the thing we all recognize today. And it set the precedent for what a modernistic portable grill would look like. Its thin steel legs converging towards a glossy spheroidal cooking chamber resembled the ball and rod styling of the day that celebrated technology by alluding to scientific models of molecules. Built-ins also benefited from continual makeovers. Confirming barbecue's high-style modernist potential, the California design magazine Arts and Architecture incorporated the barbecue into some of its ultra-modern case study houses. On the right, we see an example of that, the hole in the brick there. Barbecue hadn't yet been delivered, but there it is waiting to receive it. In 1957, Frigidaire, a division of General Motors, introduced the squared-off sheer look, as they called it, in appliance design, replacing the last vestiges of 1930s streamlining. Other companies followed suit, and in 1960, General Electric introduced the luxurious and very sheer patio cart, aimed at sophisticated suburbanites who preferred entertaining outdoors in style. A color-matched umbrella, shaded slabs of turquoise enameled steel, and real maple counters. The ad on the left reads, "The patio cart has 5 big wheels. One is you. Don't risk losing your man who has everything status. Be the first in your crowd to own one," end quote. And Dwight Eisenhower, there he is with his patio cart, described it as the most fantastic thing you ever saw. Continual reinvention kept the barbecue current. In 1968, William Wiggins designed the ball-BQ in the latest mod style, with grills nestled within a sphere balanced on a cone. I own one. It's pretty damn cool, I have to tell you. You can only cook 2 hamburgers at a time, but you'll look great doing it. Even the iconic Weber was not immune to changes in taste. The Seville at the top fit into the latest trends in Mediterranean interior design, while the penthouse at the bottom enabled apartment dwellers to barbecue on their small balconies and burn down the building. Gas grills were more conservatively styled because they were tethered to a propane tank. It's kind of hard to make them look very sexy. Though commercial gas-fired grills debuted in 1939 at the New York World's Fair, the first real domestically available portable gas grills were introduced in 1954 here in Chicago by the Chicago Combustion Corporation. In 1959, the year that Chicago Combustion enjoyed its first national success, its model AP sold for $131, which is about $1,400 today. In addition to a seemingly endless assortment of grills, barbecue accessories, and decorations, these generated $15 million in sales in 1955 alone. So every facet of the barbecue was monetizable. Cookbooks and entertaining guides listed the requisite props and gadgets to make a successful barbecue, whether a luau with a ukulele and tiki torches, or for a more sophisticated experience, a waiting array of hibachis on which guests could prepare their custom-made kebabs. Stripped of its pre-war heritage, the post-war barbecue was free to role play along with its owners. So where all of this entertaining take place? Quote, "Whatever outdoor living the suburban family does," wrote Scott Donaldson in his The Suburban Myth of 1969, "is done in the backyard, where the smell of charcoal dominates the still air of a July night. Here then is the real suburban living. And if one is tempted to doubt it, he need look on every side to discover that every one of his neighbors are proclaiming their devotion to fresh air and the suburban, even American way of life by eating burnt steak in the dark," end quote. The patio, in some respects, had become as much a necessity as the barbecue. In 1964, author Dorothy Childs Hogner expounded, quote, "The outdoor terrace has come of age in America. It is now a status symbol of good, exuberant American living. Out in the air and under the sun, in a space formerly allotted to our backyards. In our time, the charcoal grill has become a fixture in the outdoor living scene," end quote. If built-ins were involved, the patio became a surrogate kitchen, with preparations at the boundaries and eating in the center, following the tradition that preparation is peripheral to consumption. Portable barbecues, on the other hand, work best to encourage congregating because of their mobility and self-containment. You can gather around the entire thing. A Weber grill is round, after all. Regardless of the apparatus used, the food remained in plain sight, growing more appetizing as it cooked, transforming the grill into a form of visual entertainment. The barbecue changed how groups of people interacted with the cooking process itself, which is another pretty amazing milestone that we can attribute to it. Participation and its resultant sociability are as integral to a barbecue as consumption. Although the process of a barbecue equalizes between participation and consumption, what was not egalitarian was the kind of participation that each gender was expected to provide. Every depiction of a barbecue reinforced a gendered division of labor, showing the man cooking and the woman contentedly serving. Social anthropologist Nick Fittis writes, quote, "The macho steak is perhaps the most visible manifestation of an idea that permeates the entire Western food system, that red meat is a quintessentially masculine food. Cooking meat is a significant activity for the male to have annexed, given its display of symbolic mastery, whilst being devoid of any real requirement for skill or courage," end quote. Turn your attention to this image. Note the apron, the long gloves, and utensils for protection against the tiniest grill in the world. As well, the barbecue offers the transparent control of fire that, along with the control of meat, speaks to the preparer's virility. Nearly every barbecue cookbook mentioned that barbecuing rekindles a primal flame. In 1955, Ashley Sims wrote, quote, "What is it about a crackling fire that prompts the human spirit to soar to wondrous heights? I shall never understand the magnificent transformation. Before the open sky and glowing coals, the soul of man is subtly refreshed and freed for marvelous flights," end quote. And that's a cookbook. Even cookbooks written by women prefer that barbecuing be left to the male. Helen and Philip Brown's The Cookout Book of 1961 declared, quote, "Cooking over charcoal is a man's job and should have no interference from the distaff side of the family. If the man of the house prefers to have his wife do the cooking, just skip the whole idea of doing it outdoors. Nothing makes a man look, and we should think feel, more henpecked than to have his wife officiate at the cookout. And if she should happen to be wearing pants at the time, one reaches the obvious conclusion." He goes on, Helen and Philip go on in the book, "Oh, let the woman help if you want to, like peeling the onions and plucking the game birds and washing up after you," end quote. This 1948 advertisement for Coca-Cola requires 2 women to serve the man at the barbecue a drink. When women were shown grilling, it was not because they were good at it. One of the only period images that I have come across in all the years of looking that depicts a woman cooking is this one from 1955. We've already seen it. It coincidentally also depicts a new technology, consumer gas grills, but this image is practically unique, and it is pretty amazing, appearing in Popular Science of all journals. The media, through advertisements, films, television, newspapers, magazines, consistently kept barbecues in the post-war public's eye, knitting it into the culture. Once the Ricardos moved to the suburbs in 1956, it was inevitable that Lucy would turn her ineptitude towards the barbecue. During their fruitless midnight search for Lucy's lost wedding ring, Lucy and Ethel took apart, then reassembled the uncured masonry barbecue that Ricky and Fred had just built. The next day, resigned to the ring's disappearance, the foursome tries to enjoy Ricky's grilled hamburgers. Lucy takes a bite from her burger, only to discover that her ring is inside. It had fallen from Ricky's shirt pocket the previous evening into the platter of meat. Literally and figuratively, barbecuing gave Lucy that which she had been so desperately seeking. Because of the barbecue's near inseparability from suburbia, it is often taken as a symbol for that lifestyle, and was even at the time. Even the Monkees satirized, and what are they doing satirizing anything? Satirized the superficiality of the suburban middle-class existence by giving the every town Pleasant Valley, quote, "the smell of charcoal everywhere," end quote. Unlike other trends of the era, the barbecue remained a strong presence. Its versatility allowed continual reinvention. Barbecuing offered and still offers informality, sociability, status, the enjoyment of the outdoors, purported, if not actual, ease, the confirmation of one's virility through the control of meat, pyromaniacal satisfaction, and the mark of arrival in contemporary American society. Because one could imagine him or herself as an Old West pioneer or chef of the future, barbecues became an individual as well as a social experience. Its look may have changed, but many of its implications live on, even if we hesitate to admit it. Let's face it, we must not only buy the barbecue, but also buy into the barbecue to enjoy one. It is the quintessential American coming together of product and process. It has never lost its popularity. In fact, barbecuing has never been bigger than it is today. In 2017, Jack Goldman, president of Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association, said, quote, "Barbecuing is no longer just a pastime, but an integral part of the North American lifestyle," end quote. We can trace how 20th century America lived through how it barbecued. Barbecues appeared in every cultural outlet, from books to television, department stores to campgrounds, House Beautiful to McCall's. It changed as we changed. Thank you.